Have you ever witnessed a body come back to life? It might sound absurd, but what you're about to hear challenges everything that science knows and everything faith has proclaimed for millennia. In an experiment authorized by a family, their deceased daughter was observed, and something impossible happened in front of cameras, sensors, and scientists who were prepared to dismiss miracles. This is the true story of Madeleine, a young woman who died, but perhaps never truly left. Get ready to learn about a case that was hidden from the newspapers, but still reverberates today in the corridors of science, faith, and the inexplicable. The request came from the family itself, a couple devastated by grief, but driven by a strange conviction. They authorized a groundbreaking experiment with the body of their daughter, Madeleine, a young biochemistry student who had tragically lost her life in a car accident in Lyon, France. The girl, passionate about science and fascinated by the possibility of life after death, became, against all expectations, the center of a scientific project that many called madness, while others saw it as the final frontier of modern science. The project was named the Sleeping Beauty. Using cutting-edge technology, a hermetically sealed and fully monitored environment was created. Madeleine's body was kept under controlled conditions with thermal sensors, high-resolution night cameras, and detectors for micro-muscle variations. The coffin, vacuum-sealed, was placed in the center of an underground armored chamber, and every second was analyzed by a multidisciplinary team. But there was an undeniable condition from the family. No recordings, no images were to be saved, only real-time observations, handwritten, with no permanent electronic interference. The decision, according to the father, was to protect his daughter's dignity. Whatever happened there would remain only between human eyes and analog records. The scientific team, consisting of 7 specialists, met daily in the control room, in complete silence. No one spoke. No one dared to take their eyes off the monitors. The first few hours passed as expected. No changes, no movement. The physiological data remained stable within the parameters of a post-mortem body. But as time passed, something changed. The silence grew thicker. The scientists' gazes began to meet, as if searching for confirmation of what they dared not verbalize. A strange presence seemed to infiltrate that controlled environment. It was as though the atmosphere of the place had shifted. Something invisible, but palpable. Something that didn't belong to the world of science. And at that moment, when human reason tried to transcend the limits of the natural and touch the sacred, a silent reaction began to appear on the central monitor. It was the 5th hour since the observation began. At that precise moment, a faint light began to emerge from Madeleine's body. Initially weak, almost imperceptible, it seemed to originate from the center of her chest, like a point of heat that expanded slowly. The glow, instead of bursting or flickering, grew with a living cadence, as if following the rhythm of a pulse that no longer existed. Of the 2 cameras positioned on opposite sides of the coffin, only one captured the phenomenon. The lens on the left recorded the unusual glow, with variations in intensity that oscillated between bluish and golden hues. The other camera, however, remained completely still. No signal, no light, only the image of the body, frozen in its absolute coldness. The contrast between the live recordings plunged the control room into an even deeper silence. The scientists were motionless, paralyzed, eyes wide open, mouths agape. They didn't even blink in front of the screens. It didn't make sense. It was as if science, in that very moment, was being bent before something it couldn't comprehend. The light now enveloped Madeleine's body, creating an almost tangible aura, as if consciousness itself were trying to manifest. There was no external source, no electrical interference. The light seemed to be a part of her, part of something no one could explain. The temperature around the chamber began to fluctuate irregularly. Thermometers recorded variations of up to 4 degrees in seconds, something impossible in an isolated and controlled environment like that. One of the sensors, positioned along the lining of the coffin, picked up something even more unsettling. A sound, weak, long, almost a drawn-out whisper, as if someone were calling from inside, without a voice. At that moment, Madeleine's body, though still immobile, gave the strange impression of floating. It wasn't moving physically, but there was a gravitational tension that altered the perception of everyone present. And then, like a curtain silently tearing, an invisible presence filled the room. Something was there, something not human, something that didn't obey logic or the senses, something that had been called or awakened. If you like the content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now back to the video. It was when the light reached its peak. A piercing, intense glow, seemingly coming from within the body itself, exploded throughout the chamber. And, before the incredulous eyes of the scientists, the body began to change. Tissues, muscles, even the subcutaneous structure seemed to slowly dissolve, as if made from a substance that didn't belong to this world. But the skin remained intact. Smooth, without a single crack, it stayed as a perfect sheath, immune to whatever was consuming the rest. No odor was released, none of the typical signs of decomposition appeared. There was no gas, no putrid color. The environment remained strangely clean, as if death itself had been suspended to observe. One of the scientists, the most experienced on the team, was frozen. His eyes didn't blink. His mind registered each second with surgical precision, refusing to lose a single detail. He knew this transcended any known boundary of science, yet he refused to look away. Others couldn't hold on. 3 of them stepped away from the control room, visibly disturbed, unable to continue staring at the phenomenon. One of them fell to his knees in the corridor, mumbling disconnected words. Inside, what remained of the young woman was encased in her own skin, now looking more like a sacred artifact than a human body. That skin didn't just contain something, it hid, protected, as if it were the wrapping of something that shouldn't yet be revealed. No alarms went off, no security systems were triggered. The silence was absolute. And then the clocks in the room froze. For exactly 7 seconds, time stood still. It was enough for everyone to understand where matter ends, the inexplicable begins, and when time resumed, the light ceased abruptly. A heavy darkness filled the room, as if it were sucking away the remaining energy in the atmosphere. The scientists looked at the main monitor, expecting to see Madeleine's body encased in the sacred skin, but it was no longer there. The coffin remained sealed, unchanged since the beginning of the experiment. No sound, no movement. And yet, the body had disappeared. The only thing that remained was the skin, carefully removed and sent for immediate analysis. The tests began with urgency. All spectrometry and sequencing equipment were activated. Preliminary results arrived in less than 30 minutes. There was no trace of DNA, nothing, as if that skin had never belonged to a human being. It was skin without identity, without origin, a biological material that was unknown. Meanwhile, a strange contradiction hovered between the images from the 2 cameras. The first had captured every moment: the light, the alteration of the tissues, the disappearance. The second, on the opposite side, had recorded no anomaly. Nothing. No variation. As if there were 2 realities operating at the same time, in the same space. Conversations among the scientists began to grow tense. Some clung to the data. Others, filled with a growing unease, started questioning the boundaries of science. Some argued that Madeleine's body had crossed dimensions, a passage between existential planes triggered by an energy convergence not yet understood. Others suggested they had witnessed an energetic manifestation of the soul, a kind of vital release that defied any known parameter. In light of the impossibility of repeating or recording the event, the experiment was concluded. There were no recordings, only notes, only memories. What had happened there would remain confined to the minds of those who had witnessed the impossible. And now, the silence that remained was no longer just the absence of sound. It was a silence full of mystery and questions that may never be answered. An internal document, produced hours after the project's conclusion, was unequivocal. It described the phenomenon as inclassifiable. None of the current scientific metrics could fit what had occurred into any known category. It was something beyond any technical protocol, beyond all empirical expectation. This report, kept under maximum confidentiality, immediately drew the attention of specialists from various fields. Physicists, biochemists, neuroscientists, theologians, all demanded access to the observations and the recorded data. Attempts at explanation began to emerge. Chemists tried to justify the intense light as a spontaneous reaction caused by residual molecular interactions, but all tests with similar samples failed to replicate any effect close to what had happened. The hypothesis was quickly dismissed. Neuroscientists cautiously suggested that the event could have been triggered by an energy collapse of the brain in the final stages of cell death, a release of accumulated synaptic energy. However, there were no signs of residual brain activity to support this theory. On the other hand, theologians spoke with more conviction. Many pointed to the possibility of a spiritual resurrection or even an angelic manifestation, based on ancient texts describing transformed bodies, heavenly lights, and apparitions in closed environments. The lack of concrete explanations only strengthened these interpretations. When the media discovered the existence of the experiment, they attempted to gain access to the confidential report, but it was denied. Not a single line was released to the public. Still, a small leak sparked chaos. Excerpts from the notes were published anonymously, causing a global uproar. Conspiracy theories multiplied across forums, videos, and social media, pointing to government cover-ups, interdimensional contacts, or biblical events reenacted. The world's leading universities began to pressure for an ethical review of the experiment. They accused those involved of overstepping moral boundaries in the name of scientific curiosity. Opinions split violently. For some, Madeleine had been the protagonist of a miracle. For others, it was nothing more than a collective illusion fueled by extreme emotional tension. And when science fails to answer, the world inevitably turns its eyes to the invisible. Days after the conclusion of the experiment, while clearing Madeleine's belongings, a notebook was found among her academic materials. It was an old blue-covered diary, filled with dense notes, graphs, molecular schematics, and surprisingly, spiritual reflections. The first pages spoke of the soul and light, as if she had already sensed something beyond physical existence. There were texts mentioning a conscious death and the possibility of something extraordinary happening when body and spirit aligned at the final moment. Flipping through the middle pages, fragments of biblical passages from the Apocalypse appeared. Underlined sections, comments in the margins, and even small symbolic drawings mixed with calculations and chemical structures. One sentence, in highlighted letters, seemed to jump off the page. "The flesh shall be transformed into glory." Below it, a series of energetic equations, as if she were trying to translate into scientific language what she felt in her spirit. Madeleine described resurrection not as a physical return, but as an energetic transmutation, a shift in the state of existence. For her, the body was only a temporary vessel. The true return would happen when the human essence reached a higher frequency, something that even current science could neither measure nor comprehend. She confidently stated that her departure would not be understood. that scientists would try to find answers, but all would fail in the face of what could not be quantified. Her notes blended quotes from the apostles Paul and John with advanced chemical formulas. One line quoted, "In the twinkling of an eye we shall be changed," just below an analysis of photons and light behavior in vacuum environments. There were personal messages, almost like warnings, suggesting a spiritual preparation before death, as if she had known that something unique would happen to her. The question that arose among researchers and theologians was inevitable. Was Madeleine a channel, a bridge between realities? Her writing, calm and certain, left no room for doubt about her conviction. She believed deeply that her death would not be the end. Perhaps, deep down, she had always known that what the world would witness would only be the beginning. Months had passed since the experiment's conclusion. The team was dispersed, the case filed under secrecy, and the world gradually began to forget. But then the impossible happened. On a cloudy morning in Lyon, Madeleine's parents received a call. The number was unknown, without any identification, coming from an untraceable origin. On the other end of the line, a voice that froze the blood in their veins. It was familiar, calm, serene, and it said, "I'm fine. Keep searching." Before any words could be spoken in response, the call ended. The number didn't appear in any database. The phone companies categorically stated that number didn't exist. Nevertheless, the audio was recorded by the digital call identifier in the house, and it was analyzed, repeatedly, compared with old recordings of Madeleine. Result, a 99% match in tone, intonation, and vocal pattern with their deceased daughter. The phenomenon was classified by parapsychology experts as a possible case of intelligent post-death contact, a conscious communication established between an entity and the physical world. Not a recorded message, not an echo, but a real interaction. Still in shock, the parents attempted to report the occurrence to the academic authorities involved in the experiment, but the response was cold. Officially, the case remained closed. However, a second call came, this time in the dead of night. The phone rang only twice, but when they answered, an electromagnetic distortion flooded the house. Lights flickered, devices turned off. The interference was clear, and amidst the noise, a single phrase was audible: "The light will return where there is faith." Then, complete silence. The impact of these calls led some of the scientists from the original project to meet again. They reopened the notebooks, they reviewed the notes, and most importantly, they began to study the last records from the chamber. The search began again, not for logical answers, but for meaning, for understanding of a phenomenon that refused to be explained by equations. Madeleine died, that is a fact, but her presence, her voice, her message made it clear. She left, but she was never truly gone. Weeks after the second call, a restricted team was authorized to return to the experiment site for one last analysis. The coffin was opened under strict protocols. No body, no biological trace. But there was something unexpected. Irregular marks of residual light were imprinted on the inside of the coffin. Like scars of energy, the marks seemed to respond to light exposure with a faint phosphorescence, slowly fading over the hours. It was as if the light had left its signature. The ground beneath the chamber was also examined. Samples collected 2 meters deep revealed chemical mutations. Silicon and carbon compounds were present in proportions impossible for that environment. There were molecular alterations that couldn't be explained by any known natural reaction. This wasn't just strange, it was anomalous. The repercussion of the phenomenon deeply affected those involved. One of the scientists, a declared skeptic, abandoned his academic career. He said that after what he had witnessed, he could no longer continue trying to explain the inexplicable. He converted to faith and withdrew from public life. Another, a renowned physicist, began studying theology and scientific spirituality, attempting to build bridges between the natural laws and supernatural manifestations. As time went on, the case reached the Vatican through discreet channels. A private presentation was made before members of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. No official statement was issued, but it is known that copies of the notes and analyses were kept in confidential archives. The family, for its part, transformed their grief into purpose. They founded the Madeleine Institute, dedicated to the study of death, consciousness, and possible afterlife states. The name of the young woman began to circulate among spiritualist, theological, and scientific groups as a symbol of a new awakening. The experiment was rebranded by independent researchers as the resurrection of a witness. There were no conclusive proofs, no data that definitively closed the case, but there was something that not even science could erase: the impact. Millions of people around the world were touched by this story. For many of them, it wasn't just a phenomenon, it was a call. Science sought answers, but what it found was the eternal mystery. If you enjoyed this content and want to continue exploring hidden mysteries and stories from the Bible, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This helps us bring more videos like this and reach more people interested in the Bible. Activate notifications so you don't miss the next content, and share this video with friends who might enjoy it. See you in the next one.